Welcome to another episode of The Office, where our door is always open. Today we'll be discussing the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards and its role. What value does it really add? And I'm joined by Mrs. Burnett St. Omer Fontinel, who is the Head of Information at the Bureau of Standards, and she will be sharing with us some information that I'm absolutely sure will be valuable to you, our viewers. So welcome, Burnett.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Okay, great. So, we've heard about the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, and I think a number of people do not know what the Bureau is all about. And so I felt it was necessary for us to have this discussion just to kind of clarify for our viewers what to expect from the Bureau and what is its role and how it really adds value to the St. Lucian society. So here you are to guide that conversation.
Well, thanks again for having us. It is always a valuable opportunity to be able to discuss with the public what the role of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards is. Mm-hmm. The Bureau was established by the Standards Act, and the Bureau is responsible for development of standards, promulgation of standards, all for the benefits of protecting health and safety of consumers and protection of the environment. The Bureau also is responsible for the management of the National Metrology Institute under the Metrology Act and Metrology Regulations, which empowers the Bureau to be responsible for weight and measures in St. Lucia. So the Bureau's establishment is part of a wider framework to build efficiencies in the economy, trade facilitation, ensure that there are standards underpinning products and services, and the expressive mandate is for the protection of health and safety and everything else. This is central to our work, and other areas of helping the economy progress is part of a wider mandate, but at the center of what we do is the protection of health and safety of consumers and the protection of the environment.
All right, great. All right, we do need to take our first break, and when we come back, we will continue the conversation about the Bureau of Standards. Okay, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The Office is brought to you by Renwick & Company Limited, Multi-Graphics powered by Expert Group and the Goddard Catering Group.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm joined by Mrs. Burnett St. Omer Fontinel, who is the Head of Information at the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, and we're discussing the Bureau of Standards role and what we can expect from them. So just before the break, Burnett gave us a little history on how the Bureau came about. But Burnett, can you share with us some of the major successes that the Bureau has had? And you say that the mandate is centered around health and safety of our consumers and so on. So can you share with us some of the successes?
Yeah, over the last 4 decades of the establishment of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, tremendous work has taken place in standards development and adoption. We have on record 189 standards, both adopted and developed locally, as well as standards that were identically adopted from international standards.
Right.
And this is a very critical role for the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, because without the development of standards, you couldn't have all of the minimum requirements that are supposed to be established to protect and for consumer protection and enhancement of trade. We also have a robust compulsory standards compliance program administered by the compliance program of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. Most retailers and many people will be very familiar with that aspect of the work of the Bureau of Standards. They're basically the policemen of the work of the Bureau of Standards. And under the compliance program, we go out and we do market surveillance, we do tie inspection, we do inspection of bottled water, and a number of programs fall under that, and all of that is central to protection, to safety of consumers. So you would understand some inspection of tire inspection would be important to road safety, and so the surveillance program where the bureau officers will go to supermarkets. We also are ensuring that products that come into the country, they meet the standards, and they flagged at the port, and they don't have to really enter before the bureau has an opportunity to inspect some of those.
So what
products.
happens in a situation where they come through the ports, and so now they're on the shelves, and somebody has identified that there is, you know, some sort of issue? What happens? What is the process that one would typically be required to follow?
Well, typically, anyone who has a complaint in relation to something they understand to fall below the standard that is required or does not comply to the standard, they would call into the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, and we, as an agency that would be responsible, we would identify the products that we are responsible for, and we would carry out an investigation. So if it is an issue with the labeling of a product, then it falls directly with the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. And if it is an area that may be outside of the mandate of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, the Bureau of Standards would initiate contact with the agency responsible on behalf of the complainant, and turn over the complaint to whichever other agency, be it the Ministry of Commerce or the Ministry of Health. But the Bureau of Standards has responsibility for dealing with certain complaints, and once the Bureau of Standards investigates if it is an issue with a labeling, and the Bureau of Standards find that the product label in fact does not comply, it would be removed from the shelf wherever.
Now, you mentioned some products being out of the mandate of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. Can you share some examples of what these would be?
Well, certain products like food products will fall under Ministry of Health, and pesticides and pharmaceuticals would not fall under the mandate of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. And there would be other agencies that would be responsible for dealing with issues arising from non-compliant products in those areas. Yes.
So I remember some time ago we had some issue with chicken, as an example, imported chicken. So that would fall under the Ministry of Health. And in some of the instances there is a standard for chicken parts, and but the enforcement, the Ministry of Health as a food, and would take care of that. There may be a complaint for plants, and Ministry of Agriculture would take care of that. So the Bureau of Standards, whilst we have to pay attention to some of the areas that we are responsible for, sometimes when there is a vacuum, the Bureau of Standards would still take on the initiative to work to see how for compliance, because at some point, even though we may not have a national standard or an international standard exists, the Standards Act gives certain permissions to the director of the Bureau of Standards to intervene and look at a complaint and see the merits or the merits of the complaint and take it from there. Okay. All right, we do need to take a break now. When we come back, we will continue that discussion. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. I'm joined by Mrs. Vernette St. Omer Fontenelle of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. Okay, so Vernette, what are share with us some of the most commonly used standards, just so that we can relate to what the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards actually does. What are some of the most commonly used ones? Well,
some of the most commonly used standards are those standards that are compulsory, and you have the labeling standards. There are about 3 different labeling standards, one for labeling of prepackaged foods, prepackaged goods, the basic requirements for labeling. These standards are particularly popular with manufacturers, with people who are importing products into St. Lucia. It's important that they are aware of what the standard, what the requirements are for labeling, and you get people coming in to get that standard, those standards. We also have a very popular standard, which is the ISO 9001 2015 standard. It's a management system standard. This standard is also very popular with people who are in business, and it sets requirements for big and small business. The ISO 9001 standard, the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards itself, is certified to the ISO 9001 standard. We achieved certification in 2017.
Okay.
And as we, just a couple of days ago, we had our surveillance audit for recertification at the end of the 3 years of...
Because that is an international
That's
standard.
an international standard, and it is one of the standards that is popular with in St. Lucia. We also have an electrical wiring standard. That is also a very popular standard. That standard is actually enforced by the Ministry of Infrastructure, but the standard is sold through the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards.
Okay.
And we have the environmental standards as well as the occupational health and safety standards. Those are popular standards also that are being used in St. Lucia. Some of the hotel accommodation, home accommodation standards for tourists, for tourism, tourist attraction standards, they too are popular because they all circulate around what is happening in the economy and where the interests are and how people are trying to build efficiencies into the business. Because one of the things about the use of and implementation of standards is it helps businesses become more efficient. It helps businesses understand what are best practice in their particular area. And once people start to use standards, once a business starts to use standards, they begin to develop a culture in their organization of using standards in all other areas. So the very businesses that would come to the Bureau of Standards for ISO 9001 may be the very same ones who would be interested in the occupational health and safety standard as well as the environmental standards. So implementation of standards is beginning to be something that is being seen as important in different sectors, aside from those that are compulsory, that are popular because they are mandatory. You don't have a choice. And because when people don't buy the standard, perhaps they will seek assistance for implementation. So we offer, for instance, a training in understanding the labeling standard. And in that training, a lot of graphic artists and other people who are in small cottage industries are coming to take advantage of it, because putting a product on a shelf with a standard that does not, with a label that does not meet the requirements is a big cost, because the product will be removed from the shelf. So we find people are actually coming to the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, purchasing the standard, finding out how they can implement the standard and using it. So these are some of the more popular ones that we have requests for all the time.
All right. Do we have any standards that were designed specifically for us in St. Lucia?
Well, standards are universal, and we're not inventing the wheel when we are developing standards. So there is always some kind of desk literature review that is done, and it's national standards are underpinned by international standards in most cases, beta codex standards and ISO standard, ASTM, and we may adapt the standards, or we may do it, I have an identical adoption, but there are lots of standards that are developed right at the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. We have a number of technical committees, and these technical committees are really expertise within different sectors in St. Lucia. So if there is a standard for, let us say, early childhood education centers, then you would have people with an interest in early childhood education centers, including the Ministry of Education, who would sit around the table for a period of like 2 years or somewhere in between there, to have a discussion on what should go into the standard. And so early childhood education standard is a standard that was developed right here at the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. Recreational water quality. Most of these standards are, of the 189 standards that we have, are national standards. Okay, St. Lucia national standards, and there are those that are also St. Lucia national standards, but we adopted. So the standards exist, the ISO international, an ISO standard will exist, and we will look at the standard based on our priorities. We'll look at the standard and say, okay, we want to adopt this standard as a St. Lucia national standard. It will go through a set of structures, so we'll put it out for comment, so the average person has an opportunity to say something about the standard. The standards typically are available for comment for a period of 60 days. We put the standard, we make it available at public libraries as well as on our website, circulate it on Facebook. People can download the standard. We send the standard to different sectors.
For
comment, civic groups as well as professional organizations for review and comment. So there is...
So basically we can all contribute to it.
We can all contribute to that standard. Even when it is an identical adoption of the standard, we will still put it out for comment. So a St. Lucia a standard that is typically developed here is will deal with some of the sectors that are, you know, more germane to us and the quality management system standards like ISO. These are really universal areas that they are attempting to set benchmarks for implementation of it. So the international standards normally would be in some of those areas. But we have developed a number of national standards, and let us say about 60+% of our standards portfolio are national standards.
Okay, that's excellent. All right, so we do need to take another break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the process that one should follow if they would like to see a new standard implemented. Okay, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. So Burnett, I want to ask, what if an average person, you know, sees a need for a new standard? What is the process that they should follow, and how long would it typically take?
Okay, well, typically we have a process that calls for somebody with an interest in seeing a standard developed in any one sector, that they fill a form, a new work item proposal form, and you submit this form to the Standards Development Department, and the Standards Development Department will assess the project and conduct certain reviews of what, because you may want to see a standard developed in an area, and it may just be a small area, and there are no economies of scale or not a real need. You may see a need, but at the time it's not a major priority, because we don't want to just develop standards to put the standards on the books. We want standards to actually be implemented. So once the new work item proposal is submitted and it is assessed by the Standards Development Department, it goes through another process. It also has to go to the Council of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. There's a Technical Management Committee, a TMC, and then it goes to Council for approval as a new work item. A technical committee is formed, and the technical committee is given the standard, the scope of the standard will be developed, what the standard will seek to address, and based on that you go through, there's a number of stages in the development of a standard, and you'll go through all of the stages. It takes at least a year to
complete that
that process. There's, in certain instances, a standard can be fast-tracked under certain conditions. Of standard can be fast-tracked based on the need,
right?
And
I guess the urgency.
Yes, the urgency of the development of that standard. So typically, somebody can do that, but we also have a mandate based on economic priorities that are articulated by government on areas of importance to the economy. And based on that, we would, some of the areas for development will come from that. Ministries will have an interest in addressing an issue in their sector, and they too will submit a new work item proposal for the development of a standard in that area. So when there was talk of pollution in certain bodies of water in St. Lucia, the Ministry of Sustainable Development was very interested in looking at what was happening with recreational water. And so standard was developed for recreational water quality in collaboration with the Ministry of Sustainable Development. And that standard is widely used by people who do water-based tourism, as well as hotels with interest in what is happening in the water that is for recreational use. So that is typically how a work item is placed on the agenda of the Standards Development Department.
Okay, all right, excellent. All right, so we are out of time, Vinette. So in closing, is there anything that you would like to leave with our viewers as it relates to standards development and the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards?
Well, what I want to leave with St. Lucians basically is they need to become their own policemen of what is happening in standards and their own requirements for quality, and because we can do a lot of work on our end, but as a matter of a need to promote standards, it is the consumer who has to make certain demands on the person who's providing a service or product for them to meet certain requirements and meet certain standards. So people should find out what kind of programs are available in the certification department, for example. It's an area that it's just, we have a fraction of use of certification programs at the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. That is available, and but the public would have to start making demands of the people who provide service, maybe your food vendor, find out about what are they doing, are they familiar with basic training in food safety and hygiene. So we want people to get involved. Call into the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, visit our website, visit our Facebook page, get involved in comments when we have standards circulated for public comment. Get involved, give feedback, and help us meet our mandate of making quality and standards our way of life.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much again, Vinette, for coming.
Thank you very much for having me, Gority.
All right.
It was a pleasure.
Okay, so we are out of time. Until next time, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at HRWise.com. And of course, share your comments or suggestions, any ideas on topics that you'd like us to address. Please feel free to share with us on info@HRWise.com. Until next time, take care.